Every day, freight and passenger trains traverse the rugged Sierra, a mountain range that divides the fertile valleys of California from the western deserts of Nevada. You're looking at the top of that Trans-Sierra route, Donner Pass. Donner Pass was named after a pioneer wagon train that was trapped in the winter snows of this region in the mid-1800s. Now, there were other railroads in the West, some quite famous. These old V&T engines are highly prized in collections all around the country. Many were sold off to movie companies, which most likely saved these grand old iron horses from being cut up for scrap metal during the Second World War. Today, perhaps the best collection of V&T engines can be viewed in Carson City, Nevada, at the Permanent Rail Museum south of town. This is one of the early V&T engines called the Inyo. Like all the other engines at this museum, it's been meticulously restored to its original gleaming perfection. The boiler is wood-fired, and the brass is usually all shined up like Sunday. On select weekends, they open the doors, fire up the boilers, and roll out the engines. Now, occasionally, the engines pull onto this device that looks like a bridge. Actually, it's a large hand-operated turnstile, sort of like an overgrown merry-go-round for trains. They use it to rotate the engines off of one track and onto a new track in a short distance, so the train can move in a new direction. They blow the whistles, clang the bells, and you can take rides on these wonderful old trains in Carson City. Nevada had a few other railroads, but they're all long since faded into the history books. They ripped up the rails, cut up the engines for scrap, and the sound of their once majestic passing is but a whisper on the wind as it blows across the open desert. However, something went wrong, wonderfully wrong. You see, there was one Western railroad that miraculously survived. And what a railroad! You are about to discover what experts say is the most complete working example of an early steam railroad anywhere in the United States. The Nevada Northern was built primarily for mining, hauling the copper ore from the pit at Copper Flat to the smelter at McGill, which was 27 miles away. In all, there were 165 miles of rail laid so the Nevada Northern could connect to the Union Pacific line at Cobre. They needed a fast engine that could go the distance in short order, hauling passengers and freight. So, from Baldwin Locomotive Works came number 40. She was a 4060 engine, weighing in at a petite 75 tons. Can you believe? This engine was actually built for speed. Her main drive wheels were 68 inches high, and rumors have it, she could fly like the wind. Number 40 hauled passengers and freight from 1910 through 1941. When buses and cars became more popular, Number 40 was retired. But before she was tucked away for a Rumpelstiltskin nap, the railroad completely overhauled the engine. Then it was pulled into the barn for the last time, where it has remained in storage ever since. When the price of copper declined sharply, the mines and eventually the railroad were closed. As a gesture of goodwill to the community, Kennecott Copper Corporation donated a major share of the railroad to stand as a working museum. We decided to find out more, so we packed up our broadcast cameras and headed out to Ely. We got to the yard early on a spring morning before sunrise. We poked around the shops to find out what makes an old railroad, and here's what we discovered. This small car was used by the weighmaster to check the accuracy of the railroad scales. Freight was shipped by the pound, just as it is today, so you can bet your bootstraps accuracy was important. Inside the old shops, everything was just as it had been the day the railroad closed. You could still smell the musty, aromatic scent of old leather and canvas. With the sunlight streaming through the panes of glass, it cast an eerie light into the early mist of morning. The stately passenger cars gave off an occasional cracking noise as the wooden coaches expanded in the warmth of the sunlight. There were smoking cars for the gentlemen and non-smoking cars for the ladies, thank you. Such was life back in 1910. The smoking cars had brass match strikers on the wall, leather seats so the ashes wouldn't catch fire, and brass spittoons on the floor for the tobacco juice. Overhead, chandeliers made of Czechoslovakian stained glass hung from empire ceilings. The walls were made of inlaid wood with gold leaf stencil. Now, this device is a steam-powered rotary snowplow, only one of 7 in existence. And here is the slag pond, a special car designed to haul off the molten slag from the copper smelter. This big pot tilted to one side to dump its fiery load into the slag pile. There was lots of old rolling stock parked on the sidings between the shops. Why, they've even got the original caboose. The Nevada Northern won several safety records over the years, as you can see by the signs. And back then, they didn't care for traveling salesmen any more than we do today. But make no mistake, this was a proud line that was run by the numbers. Meanwhile, outside by the engine house, they were rolling up the door in anticipation of our filming. And there she was, number 40. Overnight, the firemen had banked a fire in her boiler so the firebox and water jackets would stay warm. There was just enough pressure in the boiler to bring her out the door. The young fireman talked with Nevada Northern veteran T.J. Buck Lanny about the engine. Then they emptied the ashes from the firebox, just like you open the grates on the bottom of a stove. Meanwhile, a front-end loader started putting coal into the tender. It wasn't as quaint as the old coal chute, but at least it worked. Of course, it was pretty plain to see old Buck wasn't real sure about that big Michigan loader so close to his 78-year-old steam engine. Front-end loaders. Shoot, this ain't no way to run a railroad. Next, they opened the blow-off valve to eject excess water from the boiler. Enough museum, said I. Let's do some serious railroading. They went by the coal chute and brought the engine to a stop. Then, with 3 sharp reports on the whistle, the train came out of the hole as the engineer cleared the stacks. It's amazing, the unlimited power of steam. Imagine moving a 75-ton engine plus the tender from a dead stop up to 15 miles per hour in just a few seconds. we attached one of our miniature Skyfire CCD cameras to the side rod of the engine. The side rod is the long rectangular steel beam that attaches the main drive wheel to the other drive wheels. As we move, notice how the right side of the screen appears motionless. That's the side rod onto which the camera is attached. But on the left side, look how the ground goes up and down like we're riding in a seasick boat. That's because the side rod moves up and down and forward and back as it turns the drive wheels. We cruised on out of the yard toward the main line to make a run up the mountain. But first, we had to get the train turned around and onto the main track. Now, if you have a turnstile similar to what we showed you in front of the V&T Museum earlier in the program, you can turn a very large locomotive around in a very short distance. But if you don't, it takes a whole lot of real estate to get a baby like this headed in the right direction. The engineer gives 3 short blasts on the steam whistle, which means the train is going to back up. As we turn up the siding, which curves away from the main yard track, we hit a bit of a slick spot, you know, placed there by wild, deep forest gnomes during the night. Watch what happens to the drive wheel as it loses traction on the steel track. This loss of traction is especially hard on the locomotive's tires, which can separate from the wheel under too much friction heat. Did I say tires? That's right, but not the Goodyear kind. These big drive wheels have tires, which are steel rings sweated onto the main drive wheel. They're more than 1 inch thick and must be replaced periodically in the shops. Now back to the siding. They throw the switch and the train moves forward onto a new siding. They throw yet another switch, and the train begins to back up onto the old siding. As we roll down the track, here is a view from under one of the Nevada Northern's old wooden passenger cars.
Well, in the early days, cars were built out of wood. They had wooden center frames and center beams and side beams, and therefore the truss rods were used to give them strength. And it's just like a truss bridge. And of course this gave rise to the old, you heard the expression, riding the rods. In the early days, why people that didn't want to pay a ticket to ride the passenger train, why they could climb under a freight car and climb onto these rods and be about a foot above the tracks.
Wasn't that dangerous?
But, well, I think it was, but it was a means of transportation for a lot of people, particularly during the Depression.
The train must pass one more switch before it can pull onto the main track. Listen to the sound of this engine. we mounted our portable cameras all over the engine to give you an unusually close, first-hand look at what it's like to go down the track on a steam locomotive. Naturally, we were concerned about vibration, so we made a short test run to check our systems before climbing the mountain. Looked pretty good from where I was shooting. They finally got the train shut down and then slowly backed up into position for our run. The engineer, Earl Newb, dropped the Johnson bar forward, cracked the throttle, and those big steam pistons on old number 40 came to life. It was coming to be quite late in the afternoon as the train climbed up through Robinson Canyon for the last run of the day. The crew, well, they'd put in a long day and their tails were a-dragging. we highballed up through the small town of Ruth and onto the steep grade. Listen to the sound of the engine echoing off the massive tailings pile.